Hi, I'm Sandy Carielli. I am principal analyst at Forrester Research. I cover the application security space, including API security. And I'm going to spend the next few minutes doing a little bit of context setting, talking about what I'm seeing in the application security space, and very specifically then in the API security space, with a little bit of time spent diving into the differences in responses from financial services versus the rest of the market. But let's start, everyone, by doing a little bit of stage setting about application security. And I'm going to start with what is, I hate to say it's one of my favorite statistics because it's kind of not a good thing, but it is certainly something that drives me in my role at Forrester to try to guide improvements in the application security space, which is the reality that applications are still the most common way in for attackers. Every year, Forrester does a survey of security leaders globally across industry. And one of the questions that we ask is, have you had any breaches due to external attacks? And if so, how did the attacker get in? Well, you can see on here, the way the attacker is getting in is through applications. This year, software vulnerability exploits, for example, vulnerabilities in open source libraries that you include in your code, that was the most common way that attackers got in. Not far behind it are supply chain breaches. This one had a big jump year over year. Certainly got a lot of popularity from SolarWinds breach, and I think there are other things that happen later in the year that will also exacerbate the awareness around supply chain breaches. And then third, we see web application exploits. So we see, the top ways in are through applications, and this is not a new trend. Last year, when we asked the same question, web application exploits were number 1, software vulnerabilities were number 2. The year before that, they were 1 and 2. The year before that, they were 1 and 2. Sorry, I think last year software vulnerability exploits were number 4, but the year before that, 1 and 2, year before that, 1 and 2. So we have this constant issue and drumbeat of applications being how attackers are getting in through the door. Now, that's the bad news, but there is a bit of a silver lining in all this, which is that security professionals are paying attention to this. This is a top priority. This is a top concern. We've been asking organizations, what are your top 3 tactical priorities for the coming year? And you can see that application security, improving application security, was the most common priority listed by our security leaders when asked for their top 3. So 21% of our respondents said application security is in my top 3 tactical priorities for the next 12 months. That's good. That's good that it's ahead of all of the others. On the other hand, if we compare this to last year, where application security was also number 1, last year 28% of respondents said it was one of their top 3 priorities. So what do I take from this? What I take from this is that security leaders are spread really thin, and the number of issues and priorities that are competing for attention continues to grow. So even as application security remains a top priority, there are so many other things that they're having to look at that it's just hard to get the attention on it. And that's why it's really incumbent upon all of us to provide better education, more streamlined automation, and better responses so that security professionals and security leaders can put in that attention to application security, but also not lose the attention on all the other priorities in their space. Now, how does this compare with financial services in particular? Well, some good news there. It's still the top priority for financial services security leaders, but it's actually the top priority by a much wider margin. 28% of our respondents who work in the financial services industry say that improving application security is a top priority. So there is extra attention on AppSec if you're in financial services. If we start to dive into API security in particular, that's an area that's gotten a lot of attention over the last few years. I will say, and Israel, you and I have talked about this, I get a lot of inquiries on this. I get a lot of calls from end customers asking, what do I do about API security? How do I address this? Where do I start? It's not even necessarily organizations that are particularly mature in their API security processes, but they're looking at the breadth of APIs that they have in their organization. They don't necessarily know everything they have, and they're starting to say, what do we do here? How do we manage this? Do we have all the tools necessary to protect ourselves. And they're asking the right questions. So what are we seeing in terms of adoption of API security tools? This light green bar represents the number of respondents that are in the process of adopting API security, or they've already adopted API security, or they're even expanding their API security implementations. And then that dark green bar represents the respondents who said, well, we don't have it yet, but we are planning to adopt some API security in the next 12 months. So you can see there's pretty aggressive API security adoption overall. And once again, we're doing even better in the financial services space, with 70% already in that adoption phase and 16% planning to. Now, what gets interesting here as well is when we start to ask, where in the software development lifecycle are you adopting API security? You know, we talk a lot traditionally about shifting left, but API security is really something that you have to consider throughout your entire software development lifecycle. It's not something you can just do in development. You have to do it in development, in testing, and also in production. And it's really critical to make sure you're doing it everywhere. So what we're seeing is that when we ask about adopting API security at different stages of the lifecycle, there has been traditionally a fair amount of adoption in development, testing, and production. But a lot of the plans are focused more on development and testing. So there is still some work to do in order to do what I sometimes refer to as shift everywhere, make sure that we are addressing API security at all stages of the life cycle. Now, how does this compare to financial services? We looked at who is planning to adopt or adopting API security at each stage of the life cycle and comparing that to the financial services industry. Once again, in a lot of cases, financial services is ahead of the game. You can see, particularly in development and testing, there's a much higher adoption percentage than for financial services than across the board. Production, slight lag, and a more significant lag in design. So there's definitely still some work to do and some considerations to be made for those of you in financial services looking at this. What more can you be doing at other stages of the life cycle? Israel, I'm going to turn it back over to you. I know that some of my colleagues on this panel have some thoughts as well.
Thanks, Andy, for this great presentation. I want to refer to Colin, as an API and security specialist at EPAM Systems. I want to refer to you the question. What do you see the challenges for the CISOs today in the API security domain? Colin, please. I think you're on mute.
Getting started great. Thanks, Israel. Great to be here, Colin Jacino, EPAM Systems. Challenges for the CISO. There is a cultural change that is required to do API security, where today we have a digital transformation-driven change in how applications are built. We are moving to the cloud, we're building microservices, and these are API-exposed microservices where we focus on building blocks instead of whole applications. This changes how we have to think. This changes how security organizations have to engage with the entire life cycle, as Sandy mentioned. Now, financial organizations are often compliance-driven, which may explain why they are engaged less at the design stage and more at some of the later stages. Those tools are important throughout the whole life cycle, but the CISOs, CISOs at financial organizations, they are responsible for a lot of the compliance and audit processes. And the cultural change is moving to enable the organization, the API producers, and the whole life cycle. It can't just be consultative at the beginning of a project. It's got to be built in. It's got to be API security as a competency and an ongoing practice.
Great. Thanks, Colin. I want to refer, to a question to Robert as a CISO at New Wave. My question to you: what do you see can be an impact of API security on an organization? API security breach or API security data leakage on those organizations?
Sure. So New Wave is a software development, but also we do government integration as well. So like financial institutions, we're obligated to comply with regulations, very strict regulations. Those usually mean that we have to make sure that we're going through various assessments, various levels of some form of audits. From our perspective, and I really like what Sandy did when she sort of level set and she showed the sort of the entire universe, the universe that we play in. APIs are very big from our perspective because oftentimes they're forgotten. That is, someone spins up a application. It could have been a proof of concept. Someone thought it was a great idea. It goes away. Who's watching that? But I think if I was to take a bigger step back, another step back, Sandy, because ultimately it all falls on us, it's more the overall. And I think we're starting to see that in zero trust. So we're hearing zero trust, et cetera. People are talking about it. What is it? And I just keep it as simple as possible. Just because of your location or your particular title does not mean that we trust you. Pure and simple. I'll keep it. I mean, there's some people who can get more elaborate on it, but I'll keep it like that. So from an API perspective, it helps us to say, we're going to view our APIs at zero trust level 2, which means we still have to authenticate, validate that in fact, the people that are hitting our APIs and those are supposed to. So the larger picture is, this is something that is definitely an iceberg type of an effect. 10% is you see, 90% is below. Oftentimes APIs are forgotten. So it's one of the things that we're looking for, obviously, from a security perspective is, are we secure? And then the next question you're going to ask me is, now prove how you're secure. So what are the metrics that prove that we're secure? Because ultimately, I'm going to say we're secure, maybe. We're not secure, probably more likely, or I don't know, which is probably the worst answer. So what this does, it helps us say, this is where we are. This is our confidence level in our security. And API is one of the components of that confidence level. And because you don't see it, it's one of those that can have a tremendous impact.
Great. Thanks, Robert, for these points. And audience, feel free to ask questions in the Q&A box. We will try to answer all of them today. And I want to move now to Tomer. Tomer has many years experience in the biggest technology companies in Israel. And I want just a question for you, Tomer, more about regulation in the finance industry. We know about this regulation. Everyone is talking about open banking and others. How do you see this impacting the large financial industry?
Thank you, Israel. I've been working for many years about security and cyber in general for over 30 years. But the last 5 years was mostly focused about API security, specifically with large financial institutes from tier 1 and tier 2, and also large enterprises. I think that we have to remember that when we talk about regulation like open banking, we basically put financial institutes, specifically bank, and then credit companies, we ask them to change their DNA. For 100 years, financial institutes saved the most important intellectual property, which is the PSU, their subscribers, their customers, very close to the chest, in a very close garden. And now they are required to allow TPPs and different fintechs to access that information on the very strict regulation that keeps the bank or the financial institution in a very problematic space when it comes to securing and understanding the information. At the end of the day, the bank is still in charge about saving the integrity and the information and the finance of his customers. Now, regulation, as Colin mentioned, is a catalyst. When someone's telling you have to do something, you need to make sure that you can do it securely. And specifically with financial institutes, interesting news, they use what we call the third generation API. They are the most advanced API. They are multi-tier APIs. They're using OpenID and OAuth and others, which are maybe more difficult to breach, but also much more difficult to secure. And in order to understand the potential threats over there, you require much more effort to make sure that no one is abusing that connection. And it requires them to have a lot of overlay security either. You really have to be able to look and be a lot of technologies like artificial intelligence, and really to analyze the API all the way to the argument level, and have a very, very strong understanding that APIs that may be designed without security in place, or maybe lacking some of that, are still in place to make sure that the integrity and the most private information won't leak, whether if it's done because of a vulnerable API for wrong DevOps cycle, or for a malicious activity. The outcome can be the same. So they have to put a lot of effort in this. When we talk with financial institutes, they don't talk about if they need an API security. The dialogue is very different. They're talking about, okay, I know I'm going to use the Swagger. Let's see how that solution is going to connect in synergy with different security elements in my environment, which makes it also very challenging because they have to co-work with different elements. So it's like a very unique environment for security APIs.
Thanks, Thomas. I want to open this question, to maybe we'll start with Sandy with this question. So API security or the OS top 10 API was introduced late 2019, and then there was a new version that came out second half of 2021. From your perspective of adoption, so are we already in the mature phase, or we're still in the innovation part? We're still organizations trying to learn, or they have already took active steps already to it? What's the stage you see in big organizations, I would say?
There's obviously a long tail. A lot of organizations still trying to learn this. In general, I think we're much earlier stage, Israel. What I find is that even large organizations a year or two ago were really asking about, where do we start? Do we know what APIs are in our environment? What tools do we already have on hand that can help us? What else do we need to procure? It is an area that has a lot of interest. It's something where organizations see the value of API security tools very highly, but is the adoption there yet? I wish it was. I wish the maturity was there, but I think we still have a ways to go.
So you think 2022 will be the year of the maturity for this?
I think it'll take a little bit longer than that, but the good news is we're going in the right direction because people are asking the right questions and they understand that it's a concern. So, it's going to be a process, but we're better than we were last year, and last year was better than the year before, and we're getting there.
Yeah. And Colin, back to you. So as you leading these work in API security for many years. So for people, most of the people, API security was born like early 2020. They heard about it, but for you, I believe you were many years backwards. Maybe give some of your insights from the early days before everyone talked about those API security as popular thing. How the organization used to look at it, and now how they shift and look at it now, maybe.
So I guess one of the concepts that organizations are thinking about now is API as a product. So today, we may think when we produce an API, we're thinking of the consumers of that API and the value that we provide. Historically, APIs were provided for an application. So the scope of functionality was narrow, and the way that they were designed was just for that application. So today, these APIs, the ones that are built as products, are more useful inherently. Now, as far as API security, there has been, there's just been a lot of, so we are able to focus on the API itself rather than the whole application. There are, in the API producer tool landscape, there's a lot evolving. We can see open API formats and JSON schema as things that we didn't really have and didn't use a decade ago, not much anyway. And Open API didn't exist at all. JSON schema was brand new. But these are things that when we develop these as part of API product development and the technical steps, those are assets that a security organization can look at during a consultation and say, I understand what information is being presented. I understand the value of it. I can do data classification. I can say this is confidential versus this is public, and prescribe. I could have more nuance in my advice toward those API producers. So we are now able to do a better job with API security. What's missing is I don't see much ongoing measurement of API security maturity. So I would like to see that if you look at 10 different projects, 10 different teams, they all produce APIs for the same organization. Do they come to the same results in terms of security controls and the thinking that went into the design and then the development and then the operation? Or are they all over the place? If they're not consistent, we have holes. And I think it's early days. But what we can see today are the tools on the producer side coming together, and now security can get in, integrate with the process, and just operate at a more consult and I guess engage at a deeper level.
Great, thanks. Maybe a question to you, Robert, as working more with the government and the health institutions. So we know this is a very regulated topic. And do you see also this API security requirements coming from there, as you said, zero trust? Is this something new? Is this something evolving? How do you see it in that space?
Okay, great. I'm going to hop in on a couple of questions you asked Sandy and Colin as well. I think we're definitely in the beginning, and the reason is that while Colin is the subject matter expert, I can't tell you when I say API security and I get sort of a blank look. And then when we go back to the government, one of the things that you have is you have assessments, and that is to say we assess the system depending upon periodically, whether it's every year, every 3 years, we assess it. And when you're having conversations about is the API part of the system and who owns the API and who's responsible for it, and is the API separate or apart from the application, there are just a lot of processes and procedures that have not been put in place. So I think we're very new, and when you go through the landscape of products, and I won't do any product pitches because I'm agnostic on products, but there are some products that are very behavioral based, heuristic, that are much higher level of security than other products that are more or less signature, that are more or less checking to see does someone send this to a signature base as opposed to behavior. So, I mean, I think we're very early in the security, and I'm not saying for financial. And the other thing about financial, just like the government, we are very regulated. That is, it is very prescriptive. It is very pedantic. So you would get more concern about API. In other places where there is not as much, a pedantic response that you must do A, B, C, D, E, F, and prescriptive, it's a little bit more wild west. Okay, so I'm sorry, I just had to hop in on that pack. Now, to the healthcare, as we all know, depending upon who you're reading, the healthcare data is worth anywhere from 8 to 15 times more than financial data. So we're definitely open to that. What we're seeing now, though, is, and in fairness to the government, we spend time saying the government is sort of bureaucratic, but we're starting to see the government is starting to catch up on this. You're starting to see them do things such as what we call ongoing authorization, as opposed to a checkbox responsibility. They're saying we're going to monitor this system throughout its course of life, and we're going to say as there are changes made to the system, we will have the necessary security impact analysis, and then we'll come back from there. So it's coming. It is definitely not mature. I think many people outside of the folks that are listening to this are probably still in the nuanced area. They're not quite sure, nascent part of this development, but it is definitely significant because so many things communicate using API. That's what we do now. So I think we're definitely in the beginning stages.
Tomer, back to you. What's your thoughts on the stages that you see now?
Just to really reinforce and compliment what Robert is saying, I think that when we approach customer now, we in the crowd here as a panelist, we know the importance of application security in general and API security in specific. But when we approach the market, I usually meet with 3 typecast of customers. There is the one is still in the obscurity mode of the hand in the sands tactic, saying this is not relevant to me, doesn't reflect on me. I have a firewall, I have an IPS. Best case scenario, I have some $50 a month WAF, and I'm in the clear. That's the problem. And there's a lot of those, and a lot of critical infrastructure running that. They are the ones who say, listen, I know I'm vulnerable. I know I have a problem. How do I start? This is a great place to start the process. And then they are the early adapters that you mentioned before. There may be API is part of their line of business. They need the new players and obviously the financial institutes. There is a wide spectrum here of players. They need to understand how to do it. And the requirement is just to make sure that, again, an API, if you talk specifically about API security, at the end of the day, API security is not supposed to be some eccentric solution. It's not supposed to be external to the organization or the CISO. It needs to be integrated as one of his tools. The problem started that we talk about what CISO is doing in the day-to-day. He is very strong. He is the king of his castle when it comes to network and general application security, for mail security. But API, bottom line, has to do with applications. And you have to understand the level of application to be able to secure it. So there is a need to add more competency and knowledge to the market to understand the risk and what are the solutions. And some customers are really outside of that space. This is why we see more and more massive cyber events that relates to API and can affect a lot of critical infrastructures. And unfortunately, we'll see more of them. Voltaire once says that he's a very famous quote saying that with great strength comes great responsibility. Obviously, everybody's talking about it as a Spider-Man quote, but Voltaire was the source. And API is a huge strength. Most people are not aware that they are using API every day, multiple times a day. Every time you share an article from your news application with your WhatsApp application using API, and then you order food or your main application using API. Now, since most of the web-driven or mobile-driven work is around API, then the attack surface is huge, as you can see. If you want to start to approach it, then someone will use it and use it and exploit it. So we are working against the clock here, I'm afraid.
Okay, now we're going to move to fast questions. Will API security replace the WAF? Yes, no, or anyone comments?
Augment.
Okay, I'll take the first. I'll bite into that. Well, if you talk about the technical level, obviously, if you compare, if you go by OWASP, they're doing great work. If you compare OWASP's top 10 web threats, the latest draft to the top 10 API, you can see there's a problem there. Not only that the WAF is really missing out of critical elements that's relevant to the API, some of them they're still there are in the lower level than required. So technically speaking, if you take a standard WAF security and an API security, it's not the same product, it's not the same aim. Overall, I'm guessing that the idea that will be one unified solution. Overall, there should be some consolidation around that, whether it would be on an on-prem environment or in a cloud environment. Currently, as the market looks, it's two different doctrine and two different technologies, and they're quite different from one another. But I'm guessing that won't stay this way forever. And generally, because API is driven to so many cyber events, I'm guessing we will see API security as part of the main cyber defense and work that's been done today. But that's, again, the market, we still have to catch up.
Anyone else want to refer to this question?
Sure, I agree with Tamar. I think at the end of the day, they'll be integrated though. I think you'll get the API integrated in the, whether it's API integrated into WAF or WAF integrated API, I think they'll come together.
And we're already seeing that in some cases. We're seeing API security integrated into some WAFs, but I think an important point is that API security is much broader than what anything WAF-like can do. So it's always also going to be more than that.
Yes, it's going to be an evolution. with APIs, you use API gateways a lot of the time. They provide a lot of functionality that supports the security. So do WAFs. I could see them coming together.
Okay. Last question, I'd say. Would people consume API security as a product or the service?
I would call both product and service too narrow. What an organization needs a competency, and API security requires, you have different things you do at different stages. The API, I believe that it will take many products to provide and support the competency, but it also requires process and method around design. And we're talking API product design. It's important to remember that these API products matter from a marketing perspective. They can be revenue generating, and even a developer portal is a marketing instrument. How easy is it to get started? That kind of thing. So and security has a lot to do with that as well. So it's not an. I think that it's just applying the term as if it were just a product or service too narrow.
I would just tap over that. I think that unlike the previous solution you talk about the WAF, I think that API it's too complex to be one size fits all. I mean, you may see it coming as a service, but that service should be highly customizable to the requirements. It's not like a standard of running your web server. There's a lot of data that have to do with your specific environment. So even if it's service, it's not the level of service that we are accustomed today. It is very standard. In a couple of clicks and you have it running. It's still very specific.
Yeah, I'd like to jump on that for a second because I think you're right, Tomer. It's the level of product versus service is going to vary a lot depending on the individual customer needs and what expertise they have in-house, what they have in their environment. Some are going to need a lot more hand-holding. Some will be able to do a lot more on their own with product. And there's going to have to be a range of offerings provided to meet the different levels of maturity, different levels of expertise that are in just such a range of users globally and in different industries. So I think you're going to see all kinds. And not unlike every other aspect of application security and security in general, we need multiple kinds.
Yeah. The only thing I'd say, I'd probably piggyback on what Colin said, which is we really need people who understand it. And that's true across. I mean, you can pick a tool, you can pick a proxy for dynamic web testing. And there's enough tools out there. The question is, how competent are you with the tools? And the biggest problem I'm having with API is when I have the discussion, it's as if I'm talking about something that many people are unfamiliar with at this point, or at the basic are just getting familiar with. So I think we have there's an education that is required.
Great. So it's wrapping up. If everyone wants to say last sentence, before we wrap up and say thank you to all audience. So Sandy, should we start with you? Wrapping up sentence.
Wrap up sentence. Over time, don't think of this as a separate area of application security. It really is going to become application security. Applications are built with APIs, so this is going to have to pervade your entire development lifecycle. Think of it from that perspective.
Colin?
Yeah, this is an exciting space that is changing rapidly. With the digital transformation that organizations are going through, we've got different tooling, different opportunity to inject security and ensure that we're protecting our customers and our enterprises.
Robert, from your side?
I think it's going to grow, as everyone said. It's going to be significant. The real issue becomes how well we can measure this and able to sell it. Because right now someone's going to say, what does it give me? What does this mean? How is this different from WAF? And then when we get caught in that sort of discussion, it's really an issue of education. Because if we're saying this, someone is looking at this as if it's a WAF, as opposed to part of the application. And then how do we quantify what that application is doing? So we still need, in my opinion, better metrics in order for people to understand what in fact we are securing.
Thanks, Tomer. Last one.
Well, I think there was an interesting time. I understand the threat levels are rising, but then again, the technologies are getting much better. We're getting new tools and new solutions. I think bottom line is it's a matter of acknowledging for the customer area to understand both the risk and the tools, and make sure you have the right decision in order to mitigate those threats. So doing something, choosing something, that's the right place to start. Acknowledging the threat.
Great. So I want to thank you all for joining this webinar. Thanks for all the attendees. Thanks, Sandy. Thanks, Colin. Thanks, Robert. And thanks, Tomer. Looking forward, to continue discussions. If anyone has questions, of course, you can approach us. Any of the panelists, you can find them and approach them. So thank you very much, and be happy to assist in anything we can do. Thanks.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks. Cheers. Bye-bye.